Hey, it's Jeff Zito, and thanks for listening to another episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to go back and check out past episodes, you can do so on celebrityjobber.com. And you can also follow on Instagram, celebrity_jobber_podcast, and youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. Please subscribe, would love a 5-star rating, and please leave a review. I mean, who doesn't remember the #1 TV show in the country, Will and Grace? I mean, it was huge. Eric McCormack played the lead role of Will Truman, and from then until now, life has been good. But what about Eric's past life? What did he do before Will and Grace? What got him into acting? What was his first job? I think we could all assume that Will and Grace was his big break, but is there something else that he considers being a life-changing moment? And we'll talk about Eric's new show, 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue, premiering on MGM+. He played Will Truman on the NBC hit sitcom Will and Grace. His name, Eric McCormack. He's my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
Hey, Eric, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing just dandy. It's a beautiful day in New York City where I'm visiting.
Nice. Well, let me just tell you, every time that commercial comes on, is it the ASPCA or whatever? God, you really get to me, and because me and my wife, we're dog lovers, and the dog that has the food, the bowl in his mouth, that's like, I'm hungry. You're really getting me here.
Well, thank you. It's funny how many times it's come up this morning. It's those are the things that can drive you nuts, and you turn them off, or you get sucked in. And luckily, it seems to be working.
Yeah. So I guess that's what I guess that's my point. I mean, it's on a lot. And are you a dog lover yourself, Eric?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've adopted dogs and cats over the years. We've never had one that wasn't rescued, and the ASPCA does tremendous work advocating for that. And for all I was just at the rescue in Pasadena, which after the fires was just filled with dogs that either had escaped the fire, or their owners had to leave them for a while because they had no place to live themselves. And so it's incredible, and it's great to highlight the work of what those people are doing.
And just so you know, even though it's kind of a sad subject matter, it's very impactful, and I think people need to see that stuff to make a difference. So, good work from you to, kind of shine the light on, a big problem that people are having, that animals are having here in the U.S. So, Eric, I know this. I know that there's a new show that you're promoting on MGM+. It's a new series. It's called 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue. But to rewind all the way back, you grew up in Canada, and what got you interested in acting?
Oh, wow. I mean, it probably started with a show that only Canadians would know called Mr. Dress Up. Some of your Detroit listeners might know.
Okay.
It was like a Mr. Rogers kind of character. And he would he'd open up his tickle trunk and pull out a new costume, and he'd be a pirate, or he'd be a this or that. And that was definitely my earliest inspiration, that and all the voices on Looney Tunes.
Right.
I think by first grade, I knew what I was doing.
That's crazy. So your parents were, had regular jobs? They weren't in the arts at all, or? Yeah, no,
I mean, it's a secondary story. I realized years later that my father had wanted to pursue acting in the early 50s. It just wasn't a real practical thing to do in Toronto. But no, he was a financial analyst. My mom was a homemaker, and this was just the only thing. There was never a second thing. My father kept saying, "Have something to fall back on." It's like, I'm not going to fall back on anything. this is it. I'm doing this.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
Wow. So you had no other. So when you went to college, did you major in theater? That was it. There was no other backup plan.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a very classical theater course, and I left from there a little early even to apprentice at a Shakespeare company in Canada called the Stratford Festival, and I was there for 5 years through my early 20s, and then spent my latter 20s in Canada, Canadian theater across the country. So that was my start. Television really wasn't until I was almost 30.
Wow. So what about, have you ever had I don't want to say a regular job, Eric. I want to say, did you ever have like a job outside of acting? Like, do you remember what your first paying job was?
Sure. Yeah, I had a bunch, but they were all in that sort of from the age of 16 till I went to Stratford. I worked at Baskin Robbins was my first job ever. I scooped ice cream for 2 years. I worked at a gas station. I worked at 2 different men's stores, parked cars at the county fair. I worked at my father's office as a mail guy, all of that within a few years. And then I got a job at a dinner theater just before theater school. And I'd had paying gig. That was my first real acting paying gig, doing a song and dance show every night. And that was in 1981, people.
Wow. I got to tell you, it's one of my first jobs. I worked at a dinner theater, but I was a busboy. And but my best pal from the dinner theater that I still talk to today, he married the lead in The Sound of Music, and we still talk today. So what do you know? Pretty, we've got a lot in common.
I was a busboy, too. I was totally a busboy. And not even in the show, didn't have understudies. And one night I overheard that the lead was sick, and I volunteered my services. And the woman who ran the show was like, "Yeah, honey, just please go back to the kitchen." And then the next day called me and said, "Were you serious?" I said, "Yes, I know this show." And I got up without any rehearsal. I just had watched the show so many times from my bus seat, and I got up and I ended up doing the rest of the run. So it's dinner theater, great things can come out of it.
Dude, it's amazing that you're telling me this story, right? Because I can tell you, like Phantom of the Opera or Sound of Music, as soon as the busboys got off the floor, what we would do is go in the kitchen, we'd get something to eat, and then we would watch the show. The show would sometimes last 8 or 12 weeks. You knew every part, every line of that show. Well, halfway through the run, and so this happened to you. Do you consider that at all, Eric, maybe your big break?
I'm going to tell you something that you're going to think I'm full of it, but the name of the show was One Big Break.
No way.
That's what it was about. It was about 6 young actors with songs from other shows, like a variety thing. And one of them was a waiter, and one of them was a shoe salesman, and they're going to get their big break in the theater. So it couldn't have been more meta or ironic.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
I would have to imagine that your real big moment was being Will Truman on Will and Grace, which was just such a great show. I'm a big fan. I can't believe I haven't called you Will yet. And I think that it was probably when it all happened for you. Did things change for you right after that show started and started gaining some success?
For sure. I mean, the thing is, I was 35 when we shot that pilot. So I had been in the theater for so many years. I'd done a lot of television, like sort of crappy television, that sort of, I moved to Vancouver in 92, and that was just after like 21 Jump Street and Wise Guy. And so there was all of these cop shows. I did a season on a cop show.
Top Cops. Yeah.
I did a bunch of those episodes. So I'd done a lot of okay stuff. I was waiting for my role. What was that role going to be? I wanted my Sam Malone. I wanted my Archie Bunker, and it came along. And so life did change a lot at 35, and has not changed back since. But I'm kind of grateful in retrospect that I did have all those jobs that we were just talking about, and I did have a real sort of apprentice journeyman run of it through my 20s.
And Eric, can you tell me like exactly what the biggest switch was, like what the biggest change was when Will and Grace became popular? How did like your everyday life, you're being noticed more, you're being treated differently, money, all of those things, like what was the biggest like kind of adjustment that you had to make after the success of that show?
I think it was, back then, there wasn't streaming. Everything was on the night before. So the biggest thing was going out to the supermarket and people had just seen last night's episode, so there was a currency to it. And right now I'm promoting a show that I hope people will see. If they don't see it, they'll see it in a few weeks. It's not the same, and not everyone watches the same shows. But the reason a show like Will and Grace or Friends or whatever is so memorable is because it was a collective consciousness for a while. And I think that was being part of that. I think it's the first time I ever heard the word zeitgeist back then. It was like, what is that? It's like, well, it's what you're in. You are part of the zeitgeist right now. It's immediate.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito.
MGM Plus's new series, 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue. Sounds a little dark, but can you tell me a little bit about it?
It is a little dark, but it starts as a kind of plane crash survival story, but very quickly morphs into a kind of whodunit murder mystery. Shades of Knives Out, shades of Agatha Christie, but with a slightly supernatural aspect too. Everybody survives this plane crash, but they slowly but surely start dying one by one of unnatural causes. And so it's 6 episodes. It's very tense. It's beautifully shot. We shot in the Canary Islands, which is exotic and lush, and Canary Islands for Mexico. And it's a great international cast. I'm the only North American in it. It's British and Irish and Icelandic and German and Spanish actors. And I think it's a really a gorgeous, almost, I just saw the first episode on the big screen. We had a kind of a premiere last week, and it looks and sounds like a movie. It's beautifully done.
Is your business today, Eric, changed dramatically from when you first got into it? And I know that there's probably a lot of ways it's changed, but can you tell me the biggest change that you see in today for film and television?
Well, particularly as someone that has made his bones in television, the biggest change is the sort of how the networks, the 4 major networks, are no longer the driving force. When I came to LA, you were there for pilot season. You were there because every one of those 4 networks was going to make 8, 10, 12, 15 pilots. And spend a lot of money on them, and 1 or 2 or 4 of them might go, and you're rolling the dice. And these days, you're not relying on them. You're relying on the streamers. You're relying on a kind of year-round casting season, which in some ways is great. Which here I am, I'm selling you a new show that I can't wait for people to see, but I also have to sell them MGM Plus because they may not have it, and that's a new part of the gig, is that I can't just say, hey, tune in on NBC. I have to sort of sell that you want to join this platform because they have got some great new shows.
Well, I've done it a million times. I've joined a platform because of just publicity on a certain show, and I'm like, I got to see this, and I've done it a million times, and I'll probably do it with this one. MGM Plus's new series, 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue. It premieres on MGM Plus March 2nd at 9 p.m. And Eric McCormack, it was a true pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much, and good luck to you.
You too. Never forget your busboy days.
I don't. Trust me. Eric McCormack, who played the lead role of Will Truman on Will and Grace, who, by the way, in real life is not gay. Just pointing that out. His first job, scooping ice cream in a Baskin-Robbins, which I have to say, after doing this podcast for like 130 episodes now, I would say the most popular first job would be working at an ice cream store. Just off the top of my head, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank. Mickey Suka, ladies world hot dog eating champion. Brett Baer from Fox News. A whole bunch of others escape me, but definitely the number one first job. Now, along with all of Eric's jobs that he listed off, dinner theater caught my attention, as that happened to be one of my very first jobs. Eric was also a busboy at a dinner theater, just like I was. So when the show starts, all the busboys and waiters and waitresses take a break and watch the show. And I guess they needed an actor, and Eric volunteers and says, hey, I'll fill in. I'm watching the show every night. I know every line. And I could completely relate to that. I think I know every word from Phantom of the Opera and The Sound of Music, even to this day. So essentially, that's how Eric got his first paying acting gig, which he attributes as being a big moment in his career. You know, and then he talks about Will and Grace. That was his big break. He's 35 years old. He's been kind of banging around the biz for a little bit, kind of called himself a journeyman, if you will. And then Will and Grace becomes the number one show on TV. And he said things have not changed for him since. And as he pointed out earlier, his love of acting and performing came from this Canadian TV show called Mr. Dress Up. So at the early age of 6 or 7 years old, he knew that's what he wanted to do. And yes, his mother and father, who were just regular working people, not in show business, talked to him about, having the backup plan. But as Eric pointed out in the interview, he said, no, this is the plan. I'm going to college. I'm majoring in theater. This is what I'm going to do. So all those jobs that he mentioned, parking cars, working at his dad's firm in the mailroom, being an ice cream scooper, the dinner theater. He said all of those jobs really played a role in who he is today, which I thought was really cool. You know, and especially because I shared one of his early jobs, you know, working at the dinner theater. And that job just taught me so much about life. Looking back on it now, it was a great job. And my friend Craig, who is a fellow busboy, and his wife, Mimi, who is one of the stars in The Sound of Music, when we were 16 years old, still friends with them and talk to them almost every day. You know, you weren't just born a celebrity. You had a life before you hit the big time. Whether you worked at a dinner theater or a used car lot, some of these celebrities had their own career for years before their big break happened. And I think it's so interesting to find out about their former life, you know, and how it all kind of unfolded. And you can listen to past episodes of the Celebrity Jobber podcast on CelebrityJobber.com. I ask you, please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating and leave a review. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please follow on Instagram, celebrity_jobber_podcast, or youtube.com/@CelebrityJobber. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the Celebrity Jobber podcast. Until then, I'm Jeff Zito.